All right. Today on the Garage Gym Experiment podcast, we have Thomas Lower. He is the creator, inventor, founder of this new product called Freebell. We're here to tell his story, get to know him. Thomas, thanks for joining. To start off, would you mind just telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate, being able to talk a little bit about the product and talk about my background. I feel like I come from like a little different background than most, like quote unquote, like fitness manufacturers or product guys.
Uh,
I'm a strength coach. That's what I've done my entire career. Um, Grew up in Nebraska, small town, lots of sports, and I got into strength and conditioning honestly through injuries. I had some really serious head trauma stuff when I was really young. Took me out of sports for a little while, and I kind of like, I guess this was like the early 2000s where a lot of high schools didn't have great strength and conditioning programs. It was kind of like just do whatever on your own. So I actually found it after sports. It wasn't even like something I was using for sports. And there's a strength coach that moved to town who just tried to get close to family, and it kind of luck of the draw. Honestly, he was too good of a strength coach to be in that small of a community, and I was doing like, I don't know if you remember the typical, I forget what people call it, like death by dimes or nickels or whatever, where you would stack tens on the squat bar and like max take a 10 off max, and just being a dumb kid. And this guy approached me and he was like, "Hey, if you really want to train, I'll see you tomorrow at my house at 4 in the morning." He gave me an address, and from that point on, he like completely took me in. So I knew that was the avenue that I wanted to take because he kind of changed my life, and that's where I first got really exposed to, I would say like what led me to the free bell. It's like we were doing heavy dumbbell snatches and like all this stuff that I just like never really seen outside of like the machine work that was going on at our high school. Like that was like at the time where I think, Penn State was sponsored by like Nautilus. So like machines were like everywhere. Um, that's kind of like where I knew I wanted to be. And, I went to the University of Nebraska, and I kind of like studied strength and conditioning and which way I wanted to go, and was kind of disappointed with what I'd seen at the collegiate. And I was following Tommy Moffitt, the guy out of LSU, and he was doing Olympic weightlifting. And so I was like, man, I want to learn this to do this, and to be able to coach it. Cause I thought it was kind of like what everybody was switching to in the collegiate scene, and got kicked out of the University of Nebraska weight room, out of the union weight room for dropping a power clean. And I was like, well, I need to figure out what I need to do. And that led me to Olympic weightlifting, and I competed. I went to Vegas, interned with Mark Philippi at the Philippi Sports Institute, did a bunch of weightlifting stuff there, learned a bunch of like sport specific stuff, and then moved. And I got recruited out to LSU Shreveport, the USAW High Performance Center, to lift weights. And that's where I really like dove into being a competitor, and competed on the national level for 12 years and met my wife and everything. And through that time, I moved to Wyoming and opened the very first club in Wyoming, and then moved back to Texas and joined up with Texas Barbell, and we won a team national championship. And that was like, I would say a lot of this stuff like together influenced the free bell, with, in Nebraska early on, I did some powerlifting at the time, and that was when Big Iron Gym was really popular. And, in West Side and stuff, and I followed some like conjugate stuff, and I was really interested in exercise variance. And my coach that was in Texas, Ursula Garza, she did a really like Soviet system, um, and like that's what like really like I think planted that seed for what eventually would become Freebell. Um, and then fast forward from there, I owned CrossFit Jackson Hole for a while, had a great gym, and then COVID happened. And, we did what I think most CrossFits did when we sent everybody home with, a kettlebell, a dumbbell. We tried to send people home with like maybe a sandbag or something. And then we did some programming. And I think like through seeing how people moved without a coach, and then using that implement myself, wanting a little bit more variety as far as like exercise to implement. I literally just like went in the garage and started messing with the Freebell.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for that. And I think I saw somewhere on an Instagram post or your website that you've been designing. It's been in like a 4-year project
Yeah.
basically to get the Freebell. So, just if you could just continue on from where you were, like what yeah, where did you start? Well, I mean, take me through those last 4 years.
Okay. Yeah, I just bought, I get long-winded sometimes, so I always try to break it up if I can. So, I built it in my garage. So I have a welding and fabrication background. So I build like off-road trucks. My dad grew up building classic cars and things like that. So I had the ability to just like to essentially build my own prototype, my very first prototype. And it just kind of like, through training with the kettlebell, and I always try to make it a point that like I don't like, I, through creating the Freebell, it was never like, oh, this is so much better than the kettlebell, or this is so much better than the dumbbell. It was never like that. Um, I've had some kettlebell people kind of come at me a little bit about that. And I was like, man, I still use kettlebells. I still use everything. Um, but like there was some discomfort, of course, which everybody has in the overhead position. Felt like being like coming from a weightlifting background, I've always struggled with like anterior shift in my upper body and like that posterior weakness from like the front rack position from all those years. And I felt like having that kettlebell posterior on my arm always had me like in this like posterior delt pec minor. Like I was just always so tight. And I was like, man, I wish I had something that was like I could stack over my shoulder. But I really like the dynamic feel of the kettlebell. I like the challenge of it. Like coming from somebody who was a weightlifter, and I always consider myself a snatch specialist. That was just like always my thing. I love like the complexity of movement. I love the challenge of it. I love like the accuracy and coordination that it's required. I was like, man, I wonder if I could do something that was like similar with that, with like a one arm, because I wasn't able to do the barbell. And truth be told, I was getting older where after that many years in the sports, like the barbell sports were just becoming really hard on my body, and I couldn't really load them, and I couldn't get to a weight that was challenging to make it as fun as it used to be. So then I created that prototype, and then I started to like, I just trained with it myself for a long time. And part of the reason it took so long, 4 years, for one, I did this all on my own. I didn't want any investors. I'm not a great employee. Like I wanted it to be like my thing. And if it was going to succeed or fail, I wanted it just to be on me. And so that takes a while because like, of course, this stuff can become expensive. And I talked to a few friends that had done some like business things aside as like the patents. So doing like the patent search and just being like, man, I wonder if somebody's done something like this in the past, and just going through those steps to like get a patent, get that in place, make sure it wasn't just like a product that was already out there. And then the biggest hurdle was manufacturing. It's like, okay, like I did a prototype, and then I think after that I had 2 more prototypes that I did. And then because I'm, like I said, I'm a coach, there was some eye-opening processes through it. And one was like differentiating between a product, like a one-off that you build, and then something that's built that you can actually produce and manufacture. It's like 2 totally separate things. When you start getting price points for machining, you're like, okay, I need to like take some machining out of this, simplify this. So then it was getting a prototype that was feasible to manufacture. And then I spent 2 years straight calling US manufacturers, and 99% of them wouldn't even take my calls. And I think that's like, I try to get that through to people because it was frustrating. And most of them told me, like, we're really straight up. And they were like, if you're not oil and gas or a government contract, like, we're not even going to waste our time. And that was honestly really disheartening. And then the few that I got quotes from were so astronomically expensive. Like it made no sense. It was like the price point they were giving me was like what it would cost for me to go buy an Eleiko barbell. I was like, this is crazy. So, luckily enough, I had coached a lot. So in Texas, I coached my own personal team. I competed for Texas Barbell. I coached for Texas State University Olympic weightlifting team. And then I traveled around and I coached other coaches on how to coach the Olympic lifts to either CrossFits or to their personal clients, things like that. And one of my clients was Atomic Athlete in Austin, Texas. And those guys have it's an amazing gym. I've known them forever. I live in Jackson Hole, and they have a history of coming up here with a guy named Rob Shaw, who owned, it's escaping me now, but he had a gym up here where he did a lot of like military and government contracts for training. And the owner of Atomic was a former Ranger. So I think he has some ties to that. And Atomic has done a lot of testing on all of Fringe Sports equipment. And Peter Keller was like, I actually coached him quite a bit. And so I went in contact with Peter and I was like, hey dude, these are my pains right now. Like, you're a good friend. I know you would look out for me. Like, what should I do? And that's when he put me in touch with the manufacturer that Fringe used. And, just was like, Peter was awesome. He was so supportive.
Yeah.
He's like, whatever you want to do, if you want me to help do this, if you want to do it on your own, if you just need guidance on skip sales. So I always try to shout out Peter because he didn't have to do that, like to essentially give me an in to somebody that he had a history with. And so I started working with that manufacturer overseas, got the prototypes done that were produced, and we used outside, everything we did in the States as far as prototype was mild steel. And then we started to use the ductile iron, and now we're weeks away from having a container shipped with our final product.
Exciting. It'd be cool to hear like your definition of what the Freebell is.
Yeah. So I explain it. So it's bilateral offset weight with a rotating handle, and that's my best way to like a one sentence type of view of it. Essentially what the Freebell, like when I look at the Freebell, I look at, when I was talking about like the conjugate system in Westside, I was always fascinated with exercise selection and how you can use different implements within a programming to get a different stimulus to also stay healthy, but still have the same, like we're still looking like if Westside's looking to grow the squat and they're using safety bar, camper bar, bands, chains, like they're using that variance to give a different stimulus, but still with the same overall goal. And I think that's why, when people talk about like different like F45 or CrossFit, how they do legs every day or whatever, it's like, yeah, but they're changing. The exercise selection is a big part of that. And like I said, my coach in Texas, she used a solvent system. And in Olympic weightlifting, we can't really change the implement. We have to use the barbell, but we would use like tons of different types of exercises, like narrow grip snatches and these complexes and things like that. And that was the same idea as far as like staying, like keeping the main thing, as far as like we're trying to get better at snatch and clean and jerk, but using that. And I think of that the same way in the Freebell. It's like we can use the Freebell to do some of these really dynamic movements, and it gives you a complete different feel. I always relate it to like the snatch was the first one that I really thought about with the Freebell. I always struggled with the fact that like with a barbell, the reason we use these really high quality bearing barbells is because we want to be able to turn the bar over really late, right? And that gives us the ability to keep the bar really close to the body throughout your pull. Because as soon as the bar gets away from your center, right, you start to swing, it puts more stress on the shoulders, you jump forward. Same idea with any pull to the top. And when you're using a fixed implement, you actually have to rotate the mass. That's just part of it, right? You have to rotate the dumbbell, you have to rotate the kettlebell. And I was like, how cool would it be if I could use the rotating handle to keep it really close and then spin late, allowing me like a really straight path. And then in my overhead position, one thing that I always struggled with in CrossFit was you'd be coaching people and they would just like throw snatches up and it looked like their shoulder was like lifting up. And it was really hard to coach the point of like how you receive the weight, right? Because it's like, they're like, I'm getting it up, I'm locking it out. Like, what's the problem? And it's like, yeah, but you're trap lifting, your shoulder's getting out of place, your scapula's flaring out, and you're almost like jerking your shoulder at the top. And I was like, what if we had an implement that would help make that correction? And the Freebell gave this really, really cool feedback to where it was like, you turn it over, and if you over pulled it, it would start to swing. It'd start to get out of whack a little bit. If you pulled it forward, if you pulled it out to the side. And I thought that was really cool. And honestly, gave you the ability to do these movements, make them a little bit more challenging, but keep the load lighter. And I thought that was really cool for like general population. And then I started to relate it to kids. And I'm the strength conditioning coach for our high school. So I coach over 100 football players. I have indoor track, lacrosse, basketball, Nordic skiing. And I like to use these dynamic lifts, and having a weight that gave a little bit of feedback as far as like their body placement, the weight placement, how they move. And you can give this like a very precise goal. Like if I'm doing a one arm split jerk and I'm saying like, okay, dip drive, I want a straight drive. I want you to catch this nice fluid position. And your goal is for that bell to remain stable, right? And then you can't get out of that split position until the bell stops and recover. When you're coaching a really large group of kids and you can like give them this like very specific feedback, that was like honestly a game changer.
Yeah. I mean, I wanted to add a little bit of thoughts as far as like general population. And I also just like thinking about as far as like when I was a high school athlete, thinking about like how difficult it is for, the strength coaches to teach form with like such large groups. I imagine that's really hard. And I can't imagine any coach correctly teaching an entire team to like safely do a kettlebell snatch. That sounds really difficult. And like as like I'm a 36-year-old guy trying to stay in shape, thinking about doing kettlebell snatch with a kettlebell, and like I'm like nah, like I don't want to like teach myself that form. But like with like what the Freebell looks like, it looks like you can do it and not worry about it like banging your wrist. And so I would be curious to hear like so yes, I understood what you're saying, and it makes sense to me. And I'd be curious to hear like what all can you do with the Freebell, and then what does it do best?
Well, I try to kind of divide that up into three different categories that we like use the most. And I would say like the first off is your big dynamic movements like I talked about. And what I look at as far as that's more like snatches, cleans, jerks, thrusters. So we're looking at that as far as like the stabilization of the movement, the efficiency of the movement, and the feedback from the movement, right? So gives you, there's actually a pretty short learning curve, what I've found even with my clients that are in their 50s that are using it. So we look at like getting really proper feedback from like your pull path and your overhead position, and then forcing you to kind of like stabilize in a proper position, especially in the overhead, right? And it'll give you that feedback. So the Freebell will never pull you out of position, but it'll accentuate that position, right? So if you catch overhead and you're forward, it's the weight shifting is going to accentuate that position. It's going to cause for a correction, and then you're going to get like in this feedback loop of like every rep is feedback. Whereas like that's not always the case with every exercise, right? Like you can kind of get away with some improper technique. If you have a weight that kind of like you snatch a lot front, it kind of pulls you out, the weight's moving, and then every rep you're almost trying to correct this with like, my goal is to keep that stable the whole time. It gives like a really good feedback, and it honestly keeps it lighter, which I enjoy a lot for a lot of my general population. Just because of that challenge, it keeps the weight a little bit lighter, but it fatigues in a very different way because of that little bit of movement. It's like all those stabilizer muscles in there. It's very interesting. And that brings me to like more of your, like the second category would be like your bodybuilding type movements. which we still use a lot. Like we press, we skull crushers, we do GHD curls and, all types of stuff. And the two things it does there is, for one, I think it kind of bridges the gap between, and this is especially for my young guys. You see like young guys in high school, right? Like they have a really hard time like understanding like their weight jumps and where they should be at. And they'll go from just like hammering weights to like all of a sudden failing a rep. And I feel like the
Mm.
free bell, it's because it's challenging as far as like you have to stay in the groove, locked out the whole time, that it makes them much more aware of those lighter weights, as opposed to like a warm up set with a high schooler. Like if they're like typically pressed 50, 60 pound dumbbells, the 30s, they just throw the weights around. There's no like concentration on where the weights should be, how controlled I should be, the lockout. Like the lighter weights kind of forces that. So it forces a tempo, it forces that concentration with each rep. Um, then the other thing that's interesting is like the same on like a skull crusher or curl or lateral raise. Like if you're doing like a preacher curl or concentration curl, because the weight pulls like it's rotating away from your wrist, the inline of the wrist, it actually creates like a mechanical disadvantage. So it's like almost harder to bring the weight back right off of like as you're going from your concentric to eccentric, or your eccentric to your concentric, right? So
Mm.
like
Hmm.
I would say for everything as far as those bodybuilding movements, like if I have my general pop, if they're training their normal like with 50, 60 pound dumbbells, like we probably stay around like the 16 to 20 kilo free bell, because of like that, the mechanical disadvantage or whatever on the curls. But then that stability, as they fatigue, it gets harder and harder. And honestly, I can just keep them safer. Then the last piece would be the rehabilitation side. So I work with a fantastic physical therapist. Her name's Caitlin Ciccone. She's the head PT for the men's U.S. ski team. And she uses it kind of like as a stability rehabilitation, right? So she tries to create an environment to get those reactions. And being ski team, she works with a lot of ACL, return to sport. That's kind of her thing. So she'll use the free bell as far as like if you're on a blue pad and you're doing single leg RDLs, that same reaction that we were talking about in the dynamic lifts, she'll use that more in like a rehabilitation side to have that little bit of movement, work on that stability, have that reaction from the athletes. So I would kind of divide it into those three things. And when I created it, was obviously like the dynamic stuff. That was like what I had in the mind. And the rehabilitation side, honestly, has been growing faster than almost anything. And then like the general population stuff, even more so than the dynamic side.
Yeah, so that leads me into my next question actually. I'd be curious to hear who you think like the early adopters are, who are the first customers going to be.
Well, I can kind of tell you because we've started, we're pre-selling
Right.
right now. So I would say gyms. Like I thought it would be much more like your home gym guy or girl that, is, I don't know, 5 to 7 years into their fitness journey, where they're somewhat experienced with some of your dynamic movements. Um, I'm seeing much more gyms that are, I would say, into youth sports. That's been where we've gotten the most interest, the most DMs, people that are looking for. I think people like the idea of that stability challenge within some of those movements for the kids. Um, I would say that's a big one. And then we do have some home gym type people, and that's, you know, home gym com is like, I'm really excited to go to that to get people's hands on it. And I think that's going to be the biggest eye opener, is when people actually use it. Like when you feel it and see it. And I knew that was going to be a challenge because it's something that's brand new. It's like, it's hard to understand until you actually do some reps. And I've had those experiences with a lot of people that would come to the gym and be like, "Hey, what's this?" Or they'd bring their brother or sister, and then I could just like on the spot, teach them and show them how it works and help them understand it. And then you're like, you have a guy who's, done 32 kilo Turkish get-ups with a kettlebell, and he's like using a 16 kilo, and he's like, holy crap, like this is like a total different space.
Uh-huh.
And but yeah.
Yeah, I think you're going to get a ton of great feedback from that home gym kind of audience. Hundreds and hundreds of people are going to be able to like get their hands on them, and you're going to be right there to hear what they have to say. Speaking of home gym owners, or just like anybody considering the Freebells, they may want to like try before they buy, or just buy a set, or a pair, I should say, not a set. So depending on strength, I'd be curious to hear what your like recommended pair would be. Like, if you can do X amount of weight on this, what's the best like starting weight for somebody to just buy a pair, because they really are reasonably priced. I think, at least. Going back to my question, what should someone start off with?
I would say, like I said earlier, I've experienced, it's almost a step down from what they're used to in the kettlebell. So I did everything in kilos, and that's partially because I was an Olympic weightlifter, and I operate on kilos, and that's just like what I'm comfortable with. I also like the kettlebell jumps. I think it's like it's just kind of a comparable jump to what you see like with kettlebell. So I think it translated really well with Freebell. So if, I'd say most guys that are like experienced, they're using a 24. Girls are using a 16 on the kettlebell. I think a step down to start isn't a bad plan. So like starting with that 16 or 12, ladies starting with, like, a lot of my ladies start with the 8 and the 12, off of like, instead of a 16 for the Freebell. I think that's a really good start. If you're, I have a couple different sets. There's like a foundation set that I sell. That's a really great one, like the 12, 16, 24. That's just like the standard that you see in almost every gym as far as the kettlebell. You see the blue, the yellow, and the green,
Yeah.
So I think that's great. And I think once people, there is a little bit of learning curve, but it is way faster than you would think. It's way faster than I would think. And I've always tried to, it's funny, I think as coaches, sometimes we don't give our clients enough credit. It's like, well, you'll be doing this movement, you'll be doing this complicated movement, and in your head, you're like, man, it's gonna take my clients forever to like catch on to this. And then you coach them for a few weeks, and your clients are moving, and they're doing all this stuff. You're like, man, I just need to give them more credit that people are really capable, you know, athletic, strong. Like it's amazing what people can do. And I feel the same way with the Freebell. Like I've seen even like I remember my very first prototype. I was training a kid who was back, and he was about to go to his junior year of college football, and he was a running back. And I remember being like, all right, dude, we're going to try this Freebell snatch. And this was like really early on. I was like, just take your time. Like it's a little different. Don't worry. Next thing I know, he's just like pop, pop. And he's just moving with it. And I'm just like, holy crap. And he just got the hang of it, loved it, moved really well with it and fluid. So that's what I would say. I would say like start light, but at the same time, like if I was a guy that was using a 24 kilo kettlebell, and we are coming out with a 32 kilo Freebell, which is going to be pretty awesome. But I think for guys, if you want to get three, like 12, 16, 24 is awesome. I think ladies, like the 8, 12, 16, like that is like a really good set. And that'll give you the ability, like a really wide variety of exercises, and then a chance to grow into it and use it for a lot of different things, because there's different things that are going to create challenges. Like the heavier one, even if you aren't using the heavier one for some of your big dynamic stuff, it's like because of the rotating handle, like farmers walks are considerably harder. It's like, and I always, we used, so Mark Philippi was a former World's Strongest Man competitor, and he owns the Philippi Sports Institute. And I remember those strongmen used to train after hours, and they had this like 2.5-inch pipe, and they would just load, and they were practicing doing grip strength on a rotating handle. It's like the same thing, man. It's like doing Like if you're doing like a suitcase waiter carry with a couple different free bells, it's like it creates a very different challenge. So even if you're growing into some of those heavier weights, there's a lot of different exercises that you can use with them.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I immediately saw and was like, there's a lot of potential here. All right. So you mentioned, we can wrap this up, but you mentioned pre-orders are still available right now. You have a shipment coming in a few weeks. Can you just explain, where you're at right now in terms of getting orders out? What can people expect if they decide to buy, et cetera?
Yeah, so we're, the holiday stuff is messed with us a little bit, which I think it did kind of everybody. So we'll have it's still going to be like spring before they're actually here, but we are providing a discount, like an early adopters discount for everyone. So I think it's Bell 10 for 10% off, and then we already cut like 15-20% off a lot of them. So it's like an extra even percent for our early adopters, and there's going to be a few different opportunities to get your hands on them. One is the Outside the Box conference. We're doing that in Florida with Uberzati, and it's going to be awesome. Like Brian Kula, David Weck, Chris Chamberlain. Like they're doing like landmine cert out there. So we're going to be there. Bo's going to give me a chance I think I got like 15 minutes. I'm going to get a chance to talk right after David Weck's going to talk and kind of have the product there. And that'll be really great because there's a lot of coaches from the area. My wife was from Daytona Beach and she grew up in Wyoming or in Florida weightlifting. She medaled internationally and was a multiple time national champion. So we have a lot of connections in Florida. So we're hopefully have a lot of our friends and stuff that come out and say what's up and get their hands on the Freebell and try it. And then obviously Home Gym Con will have like our actual sets. They'll be there by then. We're going to bring some. We'll probably sell some there, some that are on display, all the way from 2 kilos to 32 kilos. And we're super excited about that. And then the other thing we're going to have, there's a big CrossFit competition in Salt Lake City. And we're actually going to have the Freebell be a part of that competition.
Oh, nice.
Which will be
Cool.
cool. We're not quite sure about the movements yet. I think they're going to be testing some movements. Like I'm guessing there's going to be some overhead stuff. I can imagine like a 32 kilo overhead lunge or something like that, which would be pretty gnarly. But yeah, I tell people all the time, we did this. This is just myself and my wife, and I'm a coach. I'm not really a salesman. I produce this because I wanted to use this. I'll never stop coaching. That's my passion. I wanted a really interesting tool for myself and my athletes. And, the strength conditioning community has given back to me in folds. And if this wasn't something that I really felt was like a really valuable tool that coaches could use for their athletes, that people could utilize in their home gyms to get better, I would have never done it. It just wouldn't have made sense to me. I'm not here to just sell product. I really believe in it, and I use it every day. I use it with my people, and I'm just excited to see how people use it. To be honest, I think that was what I think what we've all seen, and this goes back to giving credit to your clients and your athletes. It's like I've spent 4 years with it, and I've done all these different things and these movements and this rotational stuff, but truth be told, is like the general population is probably going to figure out way cooler stuff to do with it. And that's awesome. I'm all about that, about seeing what some of these like really talented athletes out there, really talented kettlebell guys, what they figure out, how they move with it. I think that's an exciting part because that's what training's all about. It's about getting fit, having fun, do it. And that's the other side of this is like, I'm a true believer that, you have to keep exercise interesting and you have to keep it challenging. This is all about consistency. And yeah, you could just do squats and push-ups and pull-ups every day and you'll probably get pretty fit. But the chances of you doing that consistently for the next 20 years is pretty low. And I think the Freebell just is like this fun, challenging implement that keeps people really engaged. And even if that's all it does for some people, like in that avenue where it's just like, this is this new tool, like it takes me some time to get like into some of the movements and it's fun, it's challenging, and it's not just adding weight to add intensity. And that continues them on their fitness journey and they keep getting strong and fit and staying safe doing it. Then that's
awesome. Well, I'm glad you mentioned a few of those things. Number one, I've done a ton of these like inventor interviews, and they usually do just stem from somebody, in their garage, in their gym, making something for themselves and like realizing, oh, I think other people can benefit from this, and that it just they just go from there. So that's one. And then two, I think almost everybody is surprised at how like people use them. And there are usually a lot more different ways to use a certain product. So I think that's cool. You have that mindset and it's coming. And like I said, I think the same thing. It seems like a product with a lot of potential and with creativity. There's a lot of like brilliant coaches out there. There's a lot of home gym people working in small areas, figuring out how to use it in certain ways. So I think, yeah, a lot of potential here.
Yeah, I'm
Anything
a
else?
true believer that the coaches in the private sector are there's just so many hidden gems. I think there really is. It's like, and I learned that really early on when I walked. This is no downfall in all college programs, but I remember the first time I walked in the University of Nebraska weight room when the football team was in there, and I looked at the board and I was like, I saw Windler 531, and I was like, okay, so a D1 program is using a 1999 ebook, and that's fine. And not all colleges are that way. Obviously, there's some fantastic out there. But then when I started to dive into the private sector with some of these coaches. Holy cow! There is just some brilliant, brilliant coaches out there that are just working with small groups, small coaches, or small teams. 10 to 15 athletes, and they are doing some amazing stuff. And I think that this really values those type of guys that are willing to like really dive in and utilize it and think about it in a different way. And I think they'll get some great benefit out of their athletes, for their athletes, I should say. So I'm excited to spend time with those guys, shake their hands, because that's, outside of just, from a selfish standpoint, I'm 37. I retired from weightlifting, I don't know, probably 6 or 7 years ago after like 12 years of competing full on. And this is also like a selfish way of me staying in with the strength and conditioning community. I mean, community is so big for all of us. If we were in sports, if we competed, and it's been amazing. Like the feedback that I've gotten, it's been way more open than I thought. Like the community, I thought there'd be a lot of pushback from other manufacturers or other equipment guys. It's been the complete opposite. And so that's like selfishly from my standpoint, it's like getting out there, spending time with coaches who are also working with athletes. Of course I want to talk about Freebell with it, but just hanging out with other professionals that are, doing great things with these young athletes and with their clients. And like I said, my strength coach saved me. Like, I don't know, like who knows what route I would have went into from getting taken out of sports at a young age from like the head trauma stuff. But strength coaches are some of the most underrated people within young people's lives. I truly think that. And I love spending time with other guys that are as passionate about it as I am.
Awesome. Cool to hear. Yeah, it's a strong community. But yeah, anything else before we call it?
I think that's it. I think we covered a lot. So
yeah, for sure. Well, yeah, thanks for the time. Good luck these next few months getting the product out to the world. And yeah, I'll see you at Home Gym Con.
Yeah, and if anybody has any questions, I mean, feel free. I'm in the Freebell Instagram, Coach Thomas Lower on Instagram. You can hit me up. You can ask me questions, whatever. If you just want to talk about Freebell, maybe how I'm using it with some of my athletes, if it would work for you. I'm also offering, I have a few local gyms, not local, but like in the Mountain West that are purchasing sets that have asked me if I would go to their gym and actually run a workshop once they set it up. I'm
Yeah.
100% willing to go there, like get their coaches together, get their athletes together, run a workshop. I think education is a big piece of this, and I want people to be successful with it. Like I want people to like understand how to use it right off the bat and have a really good experience with it. And if that takes me flying out and teaching some workshops, I I worked for USAW, working certifications for a long time, CrossFit weightlifting. I love teaching groups of people like that. So if people are interested in something like that, um, or if that maybe is like a roadblock to you like kind of pulling the trigger and wanting some of these is maybe wanting some more education, feel free to reach out to me and we'll, of course, if you're like in Pennsylvania, it might be a little the travel might be part of it, but I'm 100% willing to help out in any way I can to help them be successful with the product.
Yep. Startup mode.
Let's go.
Um, all right. Well, thanks again for taking the time.